To begin, we'd like to talk about some of our school partners from around the country. Marvin Union School District serves a farming community in rural California. 67% of Arvin students are English learners. Over 93% qualify for free or reduced lunch. Over the last 2 years, absentee rates have declined and test scores have risen dramatically. George Arrett, Assistant Superintendent of Arvin, says, "The thoughtful classroom's focus on instructional leadership has been key. By coaching our students in how to use instructional leadership tools, the Thoughtful Classroom team has helped our school leaders help our teachers grow." Last year, East Syracuse Manoa in upstate New York saw its graduation rates improve more than any other district in the entire state. According to Kathy Southwell, Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction, thoughtful classroom tools give our teachers more strategies to engage students and increase their critical thinking, factors that we believe have played an important role in our increased graduation rates. Children's Aid College Prep Charter School in the South Bronx has a mission to serve the most disadvantaged students. Students who have received social services, who come from single-parent homes, who live below the state self-sufficiency line. In the first year Children's Aid third graders were tested, they outperformed their peers across New York by a wide margin. Principal Casey Veer says, "Thoughtful classroom tools have helped raise student achievement and fast-track improvements that produce significant and measurable results." And in a 3-year Thoughtful Classroom initiative involving 10 districts in rural Kentucky, all 10 Thoughtful Classroom districts made gains on the State Accountability Index. 9 of the 10 districts surpassed the state average, and 2 of the participating districts were the number 1 and number 3 gainers in the entire state. Gene Wilhoit, who was Kentucky's Commissioner of Education at the time, said Dr. Harvey Silver and the Thoughtful Classroom team have done a masterful job in guiding Kentucky educators to tie newly refined content standards to the key elements of an effective classroom. What all of these districts and schools have in common is an approach to school improvement called the Thoughtful Classroom. The Thoughtful Classroom was developed by Silver, Strong, and Associates. And who are we? Who is Silver, Strong, and Associates? Well, we've been working in schools for over 40 years, and we strive to help schools make students as important as standards. Key to our work is paying close attention to what the research tells us about best practice, but bringing that research out into the field and working with educators and learning from the wisdom of teachers and school leaders to refine it and make it manageable and useful so that we can use it to raise the quality of teaching and learning in a way that's practical for schools. How can we help? Well, we're proud to be an approved Illinois Empower Learning Partner, and we're approved to provide support in the areas of curriculum and instruction and governance and management, and across all 6 Illinois regions. More specifically, we're approved to provide a range of services, everything from needs assessment and planning, all the way to sustainability academies to ensure the long-term success of the initiative. And in between, a strong emphasis on instruction, on instructional design, on leadership, and on coaching, and really using those elements to help schools, to help LEAs grow. If you'd like to learn more about any of these options, I encourage you to look at Exhibit A on the Silver, Strong, and Associates section of the Illinois Empower website. One of the things that we've learned in working with schools and districts looking to make significant or ambitious improvement, it's something called priorityitis, and maybe you'll recognize it. It looks a little like this. It's when all the things that we're engaged in, all the initiatives that we're working towards, seem to be pushing the organization in slightly different directions, things existing in silos, things being fragmented, and the feeling of being overwhelmed by so many things. But what successful schools do is they overcome priorityitis to make it all about the learning so that everything is moving in one consistent and powerful direction towards improving instruction and improving learning. And one of the things that we really strive to help the LEAs that we work with do is overcome priorityitis and make 3 critical commitments that help the organization move in a consistent and powerful direction and grow. It's about a commitment to establishing a strong culture for learning, to identifying and solving the particular problems of practice that we have, that our teachers and our leaders have. And it's about building capacity, about the power of instructional leadership to increase the capacity to learn and grow. And throughout this video, we're going to be looking at some of the key findings and recommendations from the Illinois ESSA Executive Summary Plan. So one of those findings, and this should come as a surprise to no one, is about children needing a place that's safe and connected to their peers and caring adults, but also not just safe, look at that end, relevant and rigorous content, right? And this is really all about our first commitment. It's about building a culture for learning, a place where students feel safe and also a place where they're challenged intellectually. So what we did in thinking through the challenge of how schools build powerful learning cultures is we did what we often do. We start with the research. What does the research tell us? What are the general principles about a culture for learning? But then we went out into the field with the schools we work with across the country, and we worked with hundreds of educators to take the general principles from the research and to develop a simple, practical, and manageable model for schools. And here's what we found. By looking at the research, by synthesizing it with educators, is that effective learning environments rest on foundations, and all successful learning environments have these foundations. We call them the 4 cornerstones. So when we're talking about classrooms, the 4 cornerstones of effective classrooms, every effective classroom has clear organization rules and procedures, is marked by positive relationships, is a place where students are engaged, and even more than engaged, where there's a joy and a love of learning. And all effective classrooms place a premium on thinking and learning, places where students learn to use their minds well. For each of these cornerstones, we developed an essential question to help schools assess and grow in each of these 4 cornerstones. One thing to note about these questions, I said earlier, it's all about the learning. Learning is a word that we need to say again and again and again. Every one of these essential questions is about learning and has the word learning in it. So notice, it's not just how do you organize your classroom, it's how does doing it enhance learning. It's not just about do you have meaningful relationships, it's are they promoting learning. Learning is at the heart of our approach. But it's not just a learning culture that affects classrooms. It's a learning culture that we want to build across a school. So what's really interesting here is these same 4 cornerstones that we're using to build our learning culture in our classrooms are what we're also using to build a learning culture across our schools. And why is it important that these same 4 cornerstones that teachers are thinking about for the learning culture of their classrooms and school leaders are thinking about in terms of the culture of their schools, why is it important that they're the same? Well, here's why. Robert Marzano, one of our leading education researchers, as well as many other researchers, have pointed out how critically important it is to growth to have a common language, a comprehensive model that everyone can communicate about teaching and learning in the same way. It's really the only way to get to the reflective practice that we are looking for, and it's how a school or district becomes a place where we get better at teaching. So these 4 cornerstones, we assess them and build them and reinforce them to create a learning culture. They also help us craft a common language for school improvement. And one of the things that we take very, very seriously is how do we help our partners make these commitments? So we're talking about a commitment to 4 cornerstones. This is a book that we've developed called Tools for a Successful School Year. Simple, classroom-ready tools that teachers and school leaders can use tomorrow to build any of the 4 cornerstones. Simple and practical techniques, tools are a big part of how we work with schools. And so we want to make sure schools have the resources they need to put these ideas into practice. And when they do, we can really establish and build a school culture and a common language that leads to long-term improvement. Here's another important finding from the executive summary. It's about instruction. It's about developing and retaining highly prepared and effective teachers, and it's about delivering well-rounded, relevant, rigorous instruction in all content areas. And this points to the second commitment. It's about how do we identify and solve the problems of practice that are keeping classroom instruction in particular from realizing its power, from getting through to students, from working at the highest level, to raising achievement the way we know great instruction can. And boy, instruction is the thing that matters most. This is actually a conclusion reached by McKinsey and Company. They studied the top 25 performing schools in the world and concluded from that study that the only way to improve outcomes is to improve instruction. Instruction is where it's at. It's the thing that matters most. It's what we want to focus on in all of our efforts to improve learning. And here's what we know. We know from research what works. This is famous and commonly referred to and used research, the classroom instruction that works research, that helped a generation of educators identify with clarity what instructional strategies or techniques make the greatest difference in student achievement so we can really focus our efforts. This research, by the way, was recently updated and new research techniques were used to confirm that the same 9 categories are what's most important when we're talking about raising student achievement. But the challenge for educators hasn't been what the research says. The challenge has always been the how. How do I make it work? How do I take this research and make it work in my classroom tomorrow? And that's a big part of what we do at the Thoughtful Classroom is we help schools take the research and make it practical, manageable, and useful. And at the heart of this approach is a set of 4 icons that represent a very important process. It's a process that starts with what do we know? What does the data tell us? What does research tell us? What standards are we striving to reach? What does our own experience tell us about what we're trying to accomplish, right? But it also adds an important piece. You see, we often find, and research confirms, that the difference between successful schools and less successful schools is not that successful schools know more. It's that successful schools know how to cross the knowing-doing gap, know how to take what they know and put it into effective practice. Often what keeps less successful schools from getting to that place is problems of practice that are in the way. So we work with school districts to identify what are the challenges, the problems of practice that are keeping us from realizing the promise of the research and what the data tells us we need to do. Next is the solution, tools, simple, classroom-ready techniques that teachers can use tomorrow that address the problem of practice and will raise student achievement. And probably most important, the evidence. What do we expect to see if we use these tools well? This is central to our approach. And so one of the things that we've done is we partnered with McREL International, a developer of the classroom instruction research framework that I showed you, and really the leading education research organization in the world. And we developed a book called Tools for Classroom Instruction That Works. And it's 50 simple techniques designed with this idea in mind. What do we know? What are the challenges? What tools or strategies address the challenges? What will happen if we use the tool well? It's at the heart of our thinking. It's also at the heart of our approach to professional development. Any thoughtful classroom professional development initiative makes time for teachers, instructional leaders, instructional teams to identify problems of practice and to work collaboratively to identify the tools and strategies that will make the greatest difference in overcoming those challenges. And I've been talking about tools a lot. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about what I mean by tools, we've included some sample tools from this book on our section, the Silver Strong and Associates section of the Illinois Empower website. And I encourage you to check them out and to use them in your classroom. Here's another important finding. It's about leadership, right? It's about building a collaborative process where we work together to identify areas and create support. And this is the third commitment, right? This is the third commitment that we need to make it all about the learning, to get the entire organization moving in a common direction. It's about building the capacity through instructional leadership. And Leadership, we talked about instruction as by far the most important element. Well, leadership is the second. Research is clear that aside from classroom instruction, leadership and instructional leadership in particular is the second most important factor in terms of student achievement. And here's what happens in school districts where there's instructional leadership capacities strongly in place. It's really interesting research, and I'm just going to quickly point out. It shows that if our approach to developing teachers' professional development skills or learning skill, teaching and learning skills is just to provide workshops, we can expect less than 10% of what teachers learn in workshops to actually make it into the classroom. So not much is going to happen. However, if we have instructional leadership and capacities built into our approach, we can actually change the dynamic so that we move from less than 10% of what teachers learn in professional development to approaching and often over 80% actually being implemented in the classroom. And that's really powerful because instruction, we know from our previous piece, is what makes the greatest difference. So instructional leadership is how we ensure that we have high quality instruction that leads to those changes. So what is it that school leaders actually do? Well, here's what we know, and here's what's critical to our professional development approach in the schools and partners we work with. We work with school leaders to assess and build the capacity for practicing our craft. What does it mean to practice our craft? It means, does our organization have the capacity to collaborate, to learn together and identify common challenges? Does our organization have the capacity to reflect, to analyze, to look at data, to find patterns? Does our organization have the capacity to adapt, to make positive change, to implement tools and strategies that will make a difference? Does our organization have the capacity to focus on the long term, to build quality professional development and stick with it over time around a common goal of improving teaching and learning? And does our organization have a high capacity for trust? Maybe the most important, but certainly a secret ingredient, trust. Do we know that in building professional learning organizations, we need to have a high degree of trust, of recognition. We're all in this together, and we all need to hold one another's hands. And so critical to our approach in instructional leadership is helping school leaders assess and grow their craft capacities. And again, tools and resources to do it, and professional development designed specifically for school leaders to really learn in a hands-on and powerful way how to build these capacities so that the organization can learn and grow and sustain itself over time. An important part of our professional development approach is breaking professional learning up into meaningful and manageable chunks, and we call them learning cycles, right? How do we build a professional development approach that's manageable, that leads to long-term change, that's not going to overwhelm our staff? And in a learning cycle, what we do after we identify our focus and our needs through needs assessment is there's always going to be some kind of foundation training. This is a whole staff initiative often. It's laying out the goals, the tools, and the strategies for the cycle. It's emphasizing the message. It's all about the learning. It's emphasizing and creating the row as one. We're all in this together. Foundation training to support the learning. Leadership training, specific leadership tools and strategies that leaders and leadership teams can use to really assess, refine, and improve practice across the district. On-site PD, working directly in schools with instructional leader teams, often with teachers, to look and talk about practice, to model practice, in particular tools and strategies in classrooms, to work with teachers to help them identify challenges and overcome them. And follow-up coaching. This is a process that really is a partnership, right? It isn't just about training and leaving. It's about training and coaching and follow-up coaching designed to really help us focus in and overcome those problems of practice with consistent and regular and powerful support. So I've given you, I think, a quick overview of the thoughtful classroom approach developed by Silver, Strong and Associates. And I want to end with a wonderful quote from Theodore Roosevelt. Creating schools where there's high levels of instruction, where there's a culture of learning and students feel safe and challenged in that culture, and where there's instructional leadership dedicated to helping teachers improve every day, is how we create equity, right? How we create schools that are worth everyone's time and attention and worth and work in growing. And so it's about making it a good place for all of us to live in, because if we don't make it a good place for all of us, it won't be a good place for any of us, as Theodore Roosevelt reminded us. So I want to thank you for your time. We look forward to hearing from you. Please take a look at our website and some of the tools you'll find on that website there, and reach out to us. We'd love to set up a conversation about how the thoughtful classroom approach and how making these commitments can help you and your school and your district really create a learning environment second to none. Thank you again. I hope to hear from you soon.